Hi there, welcome to today's episode of Find Your Voice. Our guest today is Graham Brown, founder and CEO of Pickle & Co., an award-winning corporate podcast agency. With over 15 years experience helping corporates, startup founders and storytellers find their voice, Graham is a published author, public speaker and investor. He's created award-winning podcasts for brands, authored podcasting for brands, and founded the Podcast Accelerator, a global mastermind of podcast hosts and producers. We're very excited to have him here today. Graham, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Joe. Lovely to be here.
Brilliant. So we're going to do a quick fire sort of question round and go through
Bring it on.
a few questions. So when you're ready, we'll get started.
I'm ready as ever.
Perfect. Okay, so what does it say on your business card?
Well, I don't carry business cards, Joe, but if I was to carry one, it would simply say storyteller.
Storyteller. Okay, perfect. So why on paper should you have never been successful?
Should I've never been successful? Interesting question. Why should I've never been successful? I didn't do great at school. That's one reason why I should never been successful. I didn't pursue a corporate career. Quite early on, I started my own business. So, yeah, I mean, traditionally, I shouldn't have been successful.
Okay, so I was the same, to be honest with you. Sometimes the ones who question at school and get bored easily are the ones that have got the creative mind and think outside the box and stuff. So that's really good. So if I asked 10 of your old schoolmates about you, how would they describe you?
I hope they would be alive first. That's one thing. So, what would they say about me? Maybe a little bit of a troublemaker, quiet kid, a little bit naughty. That's probably it. I would have been remembered for much more. Actually, interestingly, my best mate at school, he's actually very famous now. In Hollywood, so we were always together, and we were always writing material. And we would write material like sketches and just creating these characters, and just getting into trouble creating these sort of naughty sketches, like sort of parodies and satire of teachers. And he went on to do some really good. No, exactly, got into trouble, but it was a good way of sort of like lampooning school. But he went on to direct quite a few well-known movies. And
Okay.
so
No
he's
chance
done
of
well
name
out of it.
dropping.
Yeah, his name's James Bobin. So he directed. So he directed Ali G, and he directed the movie with Johnny Depp in it. It didn't do great, but he directed Alice in Wonderland and the Muppets. Remember the Muppets
cool.
movie? He did those, yeah. So that was So I mean, he probably would have got remembered. I would probably got remembered as his mate.
Leveraging his popularity. That's wonderful. So, if you're writing a script for a movie, talking about movies, how would you describe the opening scene?
Of my life. Okay, opening scene. I don't know. Like maybe it's the part at which I left England to go and work in Japan in 1995. I think 96. Yeah, maybe that'd be the opening scene, because I think all good stories start with a departure, don't they? And that was my departure. I kind of left the world of comfort, and I just graduated with a degree in artificial intelligence. And they recommended they didn't have anything for me in the job center or in the university careers library, so I went and taught English in Japan in the mid-90s, and that was probably a good start. That's kind of really where it all started for me, like the communications thing. So yeah, I would probably put that in the beginning of the story, to kind of like understand how it all
That's
sort of
cool.
came
So,
around to where we are now.
fair enough. So, when was the last time you did something that scared you? I guess moving to Japan could have been pretty scary.
I've done a lot of that. So, in 2012, I sold a business, and we sold everything. We sold all our, sold the business, sold all our worldly belongings, me, my wife, and my son. We ended up packing everything into 3 suitcases and then traveled the world for 6 years. So that was pretty scary because we bought a one-way ticket to New Zealand and then just traveled, just living out of suitcases. That was quite scary. I've done lots of things like that. Most recently in 2018, moving from Japan to Singapore to set up this business when I was living a kind of a semi-retired life. And it could have easily just, lived out my days in Japan, but I missed all of that. I missed this hustle. I missed, I missed doing this, to be honest. So we sort of gave up quite a lot, leaving Japan, moving to Singapore, starting a business, moving a family, starting a new school, all of that, which was quite scary. And then, yeah, that's how it is, just constantly sort of challenging. I think there's another one around the corner as well. So there's another move on the cards.
Oh, really?
So
Where are you thinking?
watch this space.
Local to where you are now, or a bit further afield?
Depends.
See what
I
goes
think
on.
that makes sense. I think it absolutely makes sense to move to where you're treated the best and like where lifestyle's the best for you at that specific time and where you want to achieve your goals. Move there. Getting up and moving somewhere, like leaving somewhere, is tough, but I think that's really important for like achieving goals is actually quite easy, but the hardest part is actually leaving something behind. And that's why a lot of people don't be successful, because they can easily achieve their goals because they've got the motivation, they've got the ambition, but it's the fear, it's that scary part, it's the fear of like leaving places and people behind, right? That stops people.
Stepping out your comfort zone and
Absolutely.
yeah, no, definitely. That's really interesting. So when it comes to advice, then, what do people seek you out for?
Storytelling.
Storytelling.
Podcast. Yeah. Like usually podcast. I mean, usually people who have a lot of experience in what they do, have a lot of career behind them, that no public speaking, but they don't know how to, how do you sort of package that on a podcast or in a show like this? That's kind of what people seek me out for, because that's really about how do you take some existing content and then package it for a particular medium rather than create content that doesn't exist already. Is how do you sort of play to your strengths as opposed to go to a new medium and play to your weaknesses. So hopefully people seek me out for that. I mean, that's sort of evidenced by the business, right?
No, of course. Well, when it comes to technology, then at the moment, talking about podcasts and the way things are evolving, what's making you nervous right now?
Nervous. I'm nervous about artificial intelligence just because, not probably for the reasons that people, think they're going to be nervous, or, maybe they're going to lose jobs, those kind of things. I've been involved in AI from my studies, like nearly almost 30 years, right? So it seemed change. And like recently seeing this huge change in AI, and we can all see that with Chat GPT as an example, right? And the reason why it makes me nervous is that not necessarily because all the unskilled people are going to lose their jobs. I think it's the highly skilled people that are going to be most impacted by this. I think doctors, accountants, lawyers, they're the ones whose jobs are going to be taken away by AI, not people who work in 7-Eleven. No, those guys aren't going to lose out because they'll lose a job on Friday or Monday morning. They'll be back in a job, right? But it's the guys with 20 years experience who went to medical school who can be easily replaced by AI. And that makes me very nervous because that's a lot of invested life in one title, one job role. And I think that's going to be, in the next generation, a fundamental change. Even thinking about people, how many people program now, code? Like coding's going to be gone in 20 years. Nobody's going to be coding. Nobody's going to be coding. That's going to be all done by AI. And yet, in schools, what makes me nervous is I see in my school, my son's school, they're still teaching coding.
It's an interesting one. I mean, well, yeah, surgeries, for example, that could be done potentially by robotics if it's at that level, and it gets rid of the human error, I guess, if it's really programmed perfectly. yeah, it's an
Well,
interesting
surgery
one.
is actually only a small part of what most of what a doctor does. Like if you break it down, actually most of what a doctor does, most of it's paperwork, and then the other big chunk of it is looking at medical images. Like a surgeon would spend a lot more time looking at medical images than they will in actually surgery. And and that again, it just plays to the strength of AI, which is pattern recognition. Like actually, surgery itself is extremely complicated, but looking at pattern, that's no different from facial recognition. You can look at lots and lots of patterns and then match those with diagnoses. And AI is much more accurate at that. And a pattern could be, a physical medical image scan of like, your chest cavity, for example, or it could be looking at your symptoms, for example. So that is where AI is so much more effective than doctors already. I mean, surgery, I think, maybe 20 years, but right where we are now, that work, core of what the doctor does, paperwork and medical imaging scans, that's all going to be replaced by AI.
Yeah, and accountants as well, the bookkeeping side of things and looking at the tax returns all automated. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, it's a really interesting sort of insight into that. So for a $10,000 bet, then what could you confidently do better at the moment than Chat
Yeah.
GPT?
Confidently, I can make mistakes better than them. That's the important part, isn't it? It's like that's kind of making the mistakes is what makes us human, isn't it? If you think about all the superheroes, like Superman had kryptonite, and I don't know, like in the Marvel, the what sort of modern pantheon of superheroes, like the Marvel, they've all got weaknesses, haven't they? I don't know what they are because I haven't watched all the movies. Ask my son, for example. But Superman kryptonite, Achilles had his heel, right? That's the trope of the modern sort of thousands of years old hero, isn't it? And that's why we relate to them, because actually if you take away that weakness, then we don't relate to them. We don't feel any connection. That weakness is there for a reason, to make us connect with that hero. Otherwise they feel quite wooden, and they feel invulnerable, and therefore we don't feel ourselves in them, right? And so therefore that's a key part of what we can do better than machines, making mistakes. And that's interesting, isn't it? Because you think about all of our world of work is all about not making mistakes. So how can you dare to be vulnerable? How can you celebrate that vulnerability? And it isn't going out there and saying, "Oh, I made mistakes, I made mistakes," but in small ways, it's like saying, "I don't know." It's an amazing feat to just go out there. I was watching an anthropologist the other day, and he was talking about the origins of mankind and looking, picking up these brains and talking about Homo erectus and Homo sapiens and so on. And most of the questions they were asking him about the potential origin of human species, he says, "We don't know." And I thought, actually, that's the sign of a true expert, somebody who can say, "I don't know." But maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But that's the thing, is we've been ingrained with it. We've been trained in a way to be experts, aren't we? To say, we know everything about any subject. And yeah, I think that's shifting. The shift now is to expertise is somebody who can say, "I don't know," and ask really good questions. Even if you think about Chat GPT, it's only as good as the questions that you ask it, right? Being a prompt engineer is a real thing, right? So I think that's what I can do better than Chat GPT, is ask the right questions. If I sit with a client, I can ask them questions about, what are you struggling with, or what's your frustrations, or what are you scared of right now, right? Chat GPT can't do that because it doesn't know, it hasn't experienced that, hasn't made those mistakes to understand what that means to that person.
That's exactly right. It's really interesting stuff. So if you have 60 seconds, teach me and the audience something that will change our lives.
Let's talk about storytelling then. So sometimes people ask you, "What do you do, Joe?" And what do you answer them? You typically we say, "What's on your business card?" Right? Rather than tell them what you're going to do, another way of doing that and answering that question in a much more engaging way. Because if you say, "Oh, I'm a marketing manager," your conversations within those parameters, right? But instead of doing that, instead of telling people what you're going to do, tell them what you're going to build. So, for example, if people say to you, "What do you do?" Tell them what you're building in your life right now. For example, I'm building a podcast studio, or I'm building a podcast agency, or we're creating, the MTV for business, for example. And that really will change, because it will change the conversations and the outcomes of the conversations that you have with people. Because a lot of people are going to hear that, Joe, and say, "Oh, I don't understand that." But the ones who really do understand it will go, "Yeah, okay, tell me more. What's that about? Why are you doing this?" And that's really the conversations that you want to have. You want to save your energy for those people who really care about what you're doing. And you will lose people. You will lose people around you. But that's going back to the growth part of it all, isn't it? Is that the only way you can grow is by leaving people behind. And I think that really can change your life if you learn to tell a better story.
That's really, really interesting stuff. So your 20-year-old self is watching the show now. What would you advise them?
20-year-old me, well, whether or not they listen to advice is another matter. But if I do have the ear of my 20-year-old self, I would say other people really don't care about what you're doing. So stop worrying about other people. I think, I wasted too much of my life. I'm sure other people have had this as well, worrying about what other people think of me. And it's almost like a prison, especially, the worst thing is you leave corporate life and then go and start a business because you want to be free. And then you end up just playing out this narrative, which is, again, it's just like being in the corporate world. You're just living out somebody else's agenda of what you should be and how you should live your life. What success is, right? So I'd say to my younger self is that success is a story you can write yourself. And that's really important to understand, is that, you can hold the pen when you write that story. You can write it yourself. Nobody else gets to tell you what the definition of success is. If you can define your own meaning of success, then that's the key to happiness, because then nobody else can control that narrative. If cycling a bike every day is your definition of success, then that is success. That makes you happy, right? If having a lot of money is what you define as success, then that is success, right? But it's important that whatever you choose is something that you choose, and it's not something you've inherited from co-workers or the people you graduated with, or your aunts or uncles or advertisers, right? That's really important. That's the advice I would give to myself, is that success is a story you can write yourself.
That's really interesting. I think people compare themselves too much these days, and obviously the social media world and everything, that the pressure that's put on people to fit a certain sort of way of life or become what they feel is successful from what they see on a screen is really interesting. It's that's what's causing a lot of anxiety with people at the moment. A lot of pressure is put on us, isn't it? But you're right. Success is, well, however you feel it is for the individual. It could be anything small to that one person and massive to somebody else. So no, that's really good. So the final question then, Graham. So what 3 words would you want written on your epitaph?
3 words: storyteller. I don't know. Like, I suppose if there were adjectives: storyteller, adventurer. I don't know, good person. I can't really think of something that can really summarize my life in so many simple words. I don't know. I think something like that. Trying to live life on my own terms, whatever you could describe 3 words with. Something like that. Storyteller. I don't know. I'll leave that to somebody else, because I'm not actually going to create my own epitaph, right? That's the beauty of it. Somebody else is going to carve that thing. So they get to decide, right? Yeah. It's like, I think Jeff Bezos says, like, your brand is what people say about you when you're outside the room. And I guess that's the epitaph, isn't it? Like, you don't write that thing. Somebody else does.
Exactly.
So yeah, I guess maybe the one word, if there's one word that I want to put on there, it's courage. Because I love that word, because, the fascinating thing about courage, of course, the courage is the opposite not opposite of fear, right? People think courage and fear are the opposites, right? People think that, if you have fear, you don't have courage. And if you have courage, you don't have fear. That's not the case. Often they live together, right? The people who do have courage are very much aware of their fears, right? It's not like fear is a sign of cowardice, right? The opposite of courage is comfort. And that's really important, because actually what courage means as a word, if you look at, for example, it comes from the word Latin and Spanish. In Spanish, it's very close to Latin. They say corazón, like corazón, or la coeur in French is like the heart, right? Or le coeur. So the point is that courage comes from the word heart. You know, that's the source of it. That's the vulnerability, isn't it? That's the emotion, to have courage. And it's not necessarily to be free of fear, which is really important, isn't it? The difference is somebody who has courage lives according to their heart and according to what they feel. But they still accept that fear is a reality, and rather than something that confines them, is an energy that drives them, right? They turn that energy into something powerful. You know, you grow up with these kind of adversities and fears, and then you turn it into something useful, as opposed to have that sort of like cage that holds you back. So I think I'd like to have the word at least courage on there. That would be, I think, a good summary, because everything we've done, like as a family and myself, like business, leaving, traveling, all of that, I think those are scary moments, right? But those are all acts of courage at the end of the day, because if you do it, you realize you don't die doing this. That's what it's about.
Exactly.
Making memories. That's what life's about, right? So
It reminds me of the end sequence when Andy Dufresne in The Shawshank Redemption crawls through the tunnel that he's made, and he's goes through that puddle of dirt to come out clean on the other side, as he says, when he manages to break free and start his life again. And yeah, it's really interesting when you say that. It's like going through what you need to build up resilience and stress, and the things that people are talking about a lot at the moment. It makes us stronger at the end of the day, doesn't it? So
well, that scene, into that scene, going back to the storytelling part, is you'll find that scene. It's the same scene in the Bible. You see it in Star Wars. It's called the passing through scene. I know and often the hero has to physically go through something, and then by going through that, I think in Lord of the Rings, for example, I seem to remember in Lord of the Rings, Aragorn has to go through the paths of the dead or whatever, and he goes through this, and he, before he went through the paths of the dead, he was just sort of this hero, and after he went through the paths of the dead, he was a king, because he had this epitaph. There you go. Oh, epiphany. Sorry, he had this epiphany, which is this realization of, it's like in Star Wars, use the Force, Luke. It's this voice that makes him realize actually it's not about strength necessarily, but it's about something else, about realizing some other force inside of you that makes you stronger. So those scenes are pivotal in all these movies, and it goes all the way back. I'm sure before the Bible, in the stories of Gilgamesh and so on, we've been telling it with the same narrative, the same tropes. But these are really important, and I think life is like that. You have to go through. You have to, like they say, every breakthrough is at first a break with. You have to break with and push through something to get somewhere. And I think so. That scene from Shawshank's Redemption is just a good example of how it plays out.
Yeah, well, it's one of my favorite films. So it's wonderful. Well, Graham, this has been a really fascinating conversation, and hopefully it's engaged our audience, and they've taken some really good insights from it. And much appreciate your time. And just to let everyone know, if you want to build your own thought leadership journey and have conversations online, and build out your profile, then visit podcastguesting.pro. And yeah, Graham, much appreciated, and thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Joe.
You take care. Thank you very much.